My name is James Anderson, and at 52 years old, I learned that protecting a family legacy requires the same strategic thinking I used for 25 years as a financial advisor. The difference was that this time, the threat came from inside my own home. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing client portfolios in my downtown office. "Your father has passed," said Margaret Wells, the family attorney who'd served 3 generations of Andersons.
I'm sorry for your loss, James. He left you everything.
Everything turned out to be $3.2 million in assets. The manufacturing company my grandfather had founded in 1952, commercial real estate across 2 states, and investment portfolios Dad had carefully cultivated for decades. All protected within an irrevocable trust structure he'd created years earlier.
Your father was very specific,
Margaret explained.
You're the primary beneficiary and trustee. Your children become eligible for distributions when they turn 25.
When I broke the news to my wife Sandra over dinner, her reaction surprised me. Her eyes lit up with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. $3.2 million? Sandra set down her fork. "James, do you realize what this means? We're actually wealthy now." "It's not we money," I said carefully. "It's a family trust. My responsibility is to preserve it for our children and their children." Something flickered across her face. Disappointment that vanished almost instantly. "Of course," she smiled. "But surely some could be used for immediate needs. The house needs renovations, and we've talked about that Colorado vacation home. We'll need to be very thoughtful about any distributions. The trust has specific preservation guidelines." Over the following weeks, Sandra's behavior began changing in subtle ways. Her credit card spending increased dramatically. Designer handbags, spa treatments, expensive dinners. When I questioned a $2,800 boutique charge, she said, "It's celebration spending. We should enjoy our good fortune. Sandra, the inheritance doesn't change our household budget. The trust assets are separate." Her smile tightened. "You're being unnecessarily conservative, James. Your father would want his family to be comfortable." That bothered me. Dad had been frugal his entire life, driving the same truck for 12 years. Comfort meant security for future generations, not luxury consumption. The first real warning came at Thanksgiving with Sandra's family. Her sister Karen, a real estate agent, dominated conversation with suggestions about optimizing our real estate portfolio. "You could leverage the inheritance for property investments," Karen insisted. "I have clients who've doubled their wealth in 5 years." "James inherited a manufacturing business," Sandra added. "He's being overly cautious about accessing the funds." Her brother-in-law Mark chimed in. "Trust structures can be modified. I know attorneys who specialize in estate restructuring, very common when circumstances change." Sandra nodded enthusiastically. "We should explore our options." After dinner, I pulled Sandra aside. "I'm not comfortable discussing our private finances with your family. They're trying to help. You act like the money is some untouchable shrine. It's about our children's future and the responsibility that comes with generational wealth. Our children are 7 and 9, James. What about our future? The life we could have now?" That conversation revealed a fundamental disconnect. Sandra saw newfound wealth to enjoy. I saw a sacred trust to protect. The pressure escalated through Christmas. Sandra began leaving articles about trust modifications around the house and mentioning estate planning consultations. She'd found stories about families who'd unlocked 30% of trust value for current use. "The Hendersons restructured their estate," she said one evening. "We could do something similar." I read the article carefully. It glossed over tax implications and long-term consequences, describing families who'd modified irrevocable trusts through legal procedures. "Dad specifically chose an irrevocable structure for protection," I explained. "He wanted to ensure the wealth couldn't be dissipated." "So you're going to let legal documents dictate how we live?" "I'm going to honor my father's wishes and my responsibility to our children." Sandra slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, she was back to normal, as if nothing had happened. But I noticed she'd been researching trust attorneys and asking detailed questions about my schedule. 2 weeks into January, Sandra announced she'd scheduled a meeting with a family financial consultant. "Daniel Morrison comes highly recommended," she said. "He's helped couples in similar situations maximize their inheritance benefits." I didn't agree to any consultation. It's just information. Don't we owe it to ourselves to understand our options? When I researched Morrison, red flags appeared immediately. He'd been reprimanded by securities commissioners for misleading clients. His estate optimization practice seemed focused on convincing families to liquidate protected assets. I also noticed Sandra had been texting frequently with someone labeled DM in her phone. That night, I made 3 calls. First, to Margaret Wells, asking her to review modification procedures. Second, to Robert Chen, a forensic accountant. Third, to David Brennan, a private investigator. I need background research on Daniel Morrison, I told David. Also, I want to understand who my wife's been communicating with. You think she's being influenced? I think someone's convinced her that family inheritance is available for immediate access. Saturday's meeting location was professional but generic. Temporary office space that could be rented weekly. Morrison greeted us warmly, a smooth-talking man in an expensive suit. James, Sandra tells me you're interested in optimizing the estate structure while preserving long-term value. Morrison launched into a polished presentation about estate liquidity enhancement. The core message was simple. Restructure the irrevocable trust for immediate access to substantial portions. You maintain fiduciary responsibilities while gaining capital for strategic investments, Morrison explained. What about tax implications? I asked. Minimal when structured properly. I work with attorneys who specialize in these modifications. Sandra was nodding enthusiastically, asking questions that suggested prior conversations. How long does modification typically take? She asked. With proper documentation and family agreement, 60 to 90 days. We need signatures today to begin the process. Red flags exploded. The timeline was too fast, complexities minimized, and Sandra's familiarity suggested multiple prior meetings. I'd need to review modifications with my attorney, I said. Morrison's smile tightened. There are time-sensitive aspects. Tax law changes could affect availability of these options. I stood up. We should schedule a follow-up after I've reviewed this with my legal team. Sandra's face flushed. James, we've taken Daniel's time. Can't we look at preliminary paperwork? Morrison produced a thick folder. Just initial documentation to begin evaluation. Nothing binding. I flipped through pages quickly. Despite claims, these were comprehensive transfer documents that would grant Morrison's firm power of attorney over significant estate portions. These aren't evaluation documents, I said firmly. These are transfer authorizations. How long have you two been planning this? I asked Sandra quietly. Her composure cracked. Daniel is trying to help us. Help us do what? Access legally protected money? We left immediately. In the car, Sandra was silent, then exploded. You embarrassed me. Daniel was offering us a chance to enjoy your father's legacy instead of treating it like some museum piece. How many times have you met with Morrison? A few times. He reached out after hearing about your inheritance. How did he hear about it? I may have mentioned it to friends. That evening, David called with preliminary research. Morrison's been involved in 6 estate liquidation schemes over 3 years. Clients typically lose substantial portions through high-fee products and unnecessary restructuring. What about Sandra? Morrison was introduced through a social media group for spouses of inherited wealth. Appears to be recruiting for his business. I felt cold. Sandra had been targeted. Morrison doesn't work alone. He's got a network, attorneys, advisors, counselors, who convince resistant spouses to liquidate protected assets. A coordinated operation? Sophisticated and well-funded. They target families where one spouse inherited significant wealth and the other feels excluded. That night, I couldn't sleep. Dad had spent his life building wealth for future generations. Now I faced people wanting to dismantle that protection for immediate gratification. The most painful realization was that my wife had become an unwitting participant in a scheme designed to separate our family from its legacy. Part 2. The network revealed. Monday brought Sandra's announcement of a follow-up meeting with Morrison, including, quote, additional estate planning specialists. I think you misunderstood what Daniel was offering, she said. He explained there were miscommunications about the documentation. What miscommunications? The papers you thought were transfer documents were information releases. They'd allow proper analysis before recommendations. This was gaslighting. After 25 years in financial services, I could read estate documents perfectly. Who else have you been talking to? I've been getting support from people who understand suddenly having access to significant wealth. There's a support group for families dealing with inheritance issues. The support group David had mentioned. That afternoon, Margaret called with disturbing news.
I've received inquiries about your father's trust from 3 law firms this week. They're asking about modification procedures and claiming to represent parties with legitimate interests. What parties? They're probing for vulnerabilities. Someone's building a case to challenge the trust structure. Based on what? Most common approach would be claiming current management is unnecessarily restrictive, preventing beneficiaries from accessing funds for legitimate needs. This was worse than I'd thought. Morrison wasn't just trying to convince Sandra, he was building a legal strategy to force access. I met Robert Chen for breakfast. He reviewed Morrison's documents while eating. James, this isn't estate optimization, he said finally. This is wealth extraction. Look at the fee structure. Morrison would receive 15% of distributed assets, plus 3% annual management fees. 15%? Nearly $500,000 in immediate fees, plus payments that would drain the trust within a decade. He pointed to investment products they recommended, high commission annuities that would lock assets while generating enormous fees. What about legal challenges? There's a cottage industry around challenging estate structures. They recruit disgruntled family members, manufacture claims, and drag families through expensive litigation while bleeding assets. How do they recruit? Social media groups, seminars, counseling referrals. They identify vulnerable spouses who feel excluded and convince them they're being cheated. David's investigation revealed Morrison was part of a network of 12 professionals who'd done this at least 30 times in 5 years. Average take per family, $800,000 to $2.5 million. Sandra was contacted through a Facebook group called Partners of Inherited Wealth Support Network, David reported. Appears legitimate, but it's recruiting. Morrison's consultant, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, runs sessions that gradually introduce the idea that restrictive estate planning constitutes financial abuse. So Sandra genuinely believes she's being mistreated. They don't recruit greedy spouses, they create them. Take normal tensions and amplify them into perceived injustices requiring legal intervention. David showed me Sandra's progression in the group. Week 1, feeling excluded from decisions. Week 4, discussing financial abuse patterns. Week 8, asking for attorney referrals. The manipulation was professional and methodical. That evening, Sandra announced marriage counseling. Dr. Martinez comes highly recommended for couples navigating sudden wealth transitions. Martinez, Morrison's consultant. I'd prefer choosing a counselor together, I said. Dr. Martinez has specific inheritance experience. She understands the psychological dynamics. What dynamics?
How sudden wealth can make people paranoid and controlling. Fear of losing assets becomes overwhelming and damages relationships. Classic manipulation. Reframe legitimate protection concerns as psychological dysfunction. Do you feel our marriage has fundamentally changed since the inheritance? You've become someone I don't recognize, secretive about money, dismissive of my input, suspicious of anyone suggesting we enjoy benefits of your father's success. How do you think Dad would feel about using trust assets for immediate consumption? Your father is dead, James. He can't dictate how we live forever. The statement hit like a physical blow. This wasn't the woman I'd married. That weekend, Margaret called urgently. I've received formal inquiry from Morrison's team requesting detailed documentation of all trust expenditures and distributions. On what grounds? They claim to represent a party with legitimate beneficiary interests concerned about potential mismanagement. The only beneficiaries are our children, and they're minors. That's concerning. They're fishing for information to build a case rather than representing actual interests. Monday morning, Sandra announced she'd retained her own attorney. Patricia Simmons will help me understand my rights regarding marital property and inheritance assets. Another name from David's investigation, an attorney specializing in challenging estate structures. What rights are you concerned about? The right to input on financial decisions affecting our family? The right to benefit from assets impacting our children's futures? The right not to be treated like an outsider in my own marriage. The language was clearly coached. Have you discussed the trust structure with Patricia? I've explained that you've refused to consider modifications providing current family benefits. That's not accurate. I've explained the trust protects assets for long-term growth. Appropriate according to who? You? Your dead father? I looked directly at her. Sandra, do you genuinely believe I'm mismanaging the trust? Or are you being influenced by people with financial interests in convincing you of that? Her expression shifted through anger, defensiveness, and uncertainty. I'm being supported by people who understand the situation better than you admit. People like Morrison, who would receive 15% of any distributed assets? Sandra went pale. How do you know about Daniel's fees? I had his documents reviewed by a forensic accountant. You're being manipulated by people who make their living convincing families to liquidate protected wealth. The support group has no financial interest. The support group is run by Morrison's consultant. It's a recruiting mechanism. I could see her world shifting, but instead of relief, her expression hardened.
You had me investigated? I investigated people trying to access our family's wealth. You're paranoid.
These are professionals helping families navigate inheritance issues. These are predators targeting families like ours. Sandra stood abruptly. I have a meeting with Patricia this morning. After she left, I sat surrounded by family photos, thinking about the weight of responsibility. The woman who'd walked out wasn't entirely responsible for her transformation. She'd been systematically manipulated by professionals who understood exactly how to exploit marital tensions. The question was whether I could save both our marriage and our children's inheritance, or if I'd have to choose. I made 3 critical calls. First to Margaret. Prepare for aggressive litigation, file protective motions, and prepare comprehensive fiduciary documentation. Second to David. I need complete intelligence on Morrison's network, financial backgrounds, previous litigation, anything creating leverage. Third to Dr. James Harrison, a legitimate family therapist. I need to understand if my marriage can survive this and how to help my wife recognize manipulation without driving her further away. Morrison's network had made one error, assuming I'd be a passive victim. They were about to discover that protecting family legacy requires the same strategic thinking and execution that builds one. Part 3. The Reckoning. The final confrontation came 6 weeks later with Sandra's call on Thursday afternoon. I've scheduled a family meeting Saturday, she said with cold formality. Patricia thinks it would be beneficial for all parties to discuss the inheritance situation in a controlled environment. What kind of meeting? A mediation session with qualified professionals to help us reach equitable resolution about trust access. The phrasing was scripted. I knew this wasn't mediation. It was an ambush. Where and when? 2 o'clock Saturday at Patricia's conference room. She's arranged for a neutral mediator and a state specialist. I'll be there. Margaret and David met me in the parking garage Saturday. Margaret carried comprehensive documentation of Morrison's network. David had prepared exhibits showing their operations and previous victims. Stay calm regardless of what they present, Margaret advised. We have overwhelming evidence, but emotional reactions will undermine credibility. Patricia's conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, massive mahogany table, arranged for psychological pressure. Sandra sat flanked by Patricia and 2 men I didn't recognize. James, Patricia greeted us. I'd like you to meet Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who's been helping Sandra work through inheritance stress, and David Chen, our estate specialist. Martinez, Morrison's consultant. Chen, another sanctioned attorney from our investigation.
Where's Daniel Morrison? I asked. Daniel felt his presence might complicate family dynamics. This session focuses on communication rather than outside influences. Interesting. Morrison was maintaining plausible deniability. Before we begin, I said, placing my briefcase on the table, I'd like to understand who's paying for today's meeting and what financial relationships exist among present professionals. Sandra spoke first. This is supposed to be about healing our family, not attacking people trying to help. I'm establishing transparency about conflicts of interest. Dr. Martinez leaned forward with practiced sympathy. James. Inheritance trauma often manifests as hypervigilance about external influences. Let me save everyone time, I interrupted, opening my briefcase. Dr. Martinez, you're Morrison's psychological consultant who runs the Facebook group that recruited my wife. Mr. Chen, you've been sanctioned twice for aggressive trust modification tactics. Patricia, you specialize in challenging estate structures for spouses claiming financial disenfranchisement. The room went silent. This isn't mediation, it's the final phase of a coordinated wealth extraction scheme targeting my family's inheritance. I placed documents on the table. Here's comprehensive evidence of Morrison's network, their previous victims, fee structures, and manipulation tactics used on my wife. Sandra's face drained of color as she recognized materials from her support group. Sandra was recruited through a fake support network, gradually convinced that normal estate protection constitutes financial abuse, then pressured to challenge legal structures protecting our children's inheritance. Patricia attempted to regain control. Mr. Anderson, these are serious accusations. These are documented facts. Morrison's operation has defrauded at least 30 families of over $20 million in total losses. I turned to Sandra. The support group that validated your feelings, it's a recruiting pipeline. The friends who understood your situation, they're paid consultants. The professionals offering help, they plan to take 15% of our family's wealth. Sandra was staring at the Facebook group screenshots showing her gradual manipulation. But the moment they handed me papers to sign, I continued, looking directly at her, I smiled and said, "Sorry, honey, I brought someone too." I gestured to Margaret, who began distributing legal documents. Meet Margaret Wells, our actual family attorney for 3 generations. She's prepared a comprehensive case documenting this entire scheme. Margaret spoke formally. Ms. Simmons, your client has been the victim of a sophisticated fraud operation. Mr. Anderson has documented evidence of financial elder abuse targeting his family's inheritance. We're prepared to file complaints with state bar associations, securities commissions, and law enforcement. Dr. Martinez was already gathering her materials. I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said firmly, was thinking you could manipulate my family without consequences. David Brennan stood and handed Patricia a folder.
These contain evidence of similar operations you participated in. Federal prosecutors are very interested in patterns of inheritance fraud targeting protected family wealth.
Patricia's professional composure cracked. Mr. Anderson, perhaps we should discuss resolution. The resolution is simple. All contact with my family ceases immediately. Any pending legal actions are withdrawn. Your network stays away from the Anderson family permanently. I turned to Sandra, whose world was clearly collapsing around her understanding. Sandra, these people identified you as a target the moment news of Dad's inheritance became public. They spent months systematically destroying your trust in me and our marriage to access money that belongs to our children's future. Tears were streaming down her face. I genuinely believed. You believed what they carefully programmed you to believe. That's not your fault. It's their business model. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. Martinez and Chen left without speaking. Patricia mumbled something about reviewing her client obligations. In the parking garage, Sandra finally spoke. James, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I became someone I don't recognize. You became someone they created through professional manipulation. The question now is whether we can rebuild what they tried to destroy. 6 months later, Sandra completed legitimate counseling with Dr. Harrison to understand how she'd been psychologically manipulated. Morrison's network faced federal charges for financial fraud. Patricia Simmons was disbarred. The trust remains intact, exactly as Dad intended. Our children will receive their inheritance when they turn 25, with additional protections I've added based on this experience. I've also established the Harold Anderson Family Legacy Protection Fund, which provides legal assistance to families targeted by inheritance fraud schemes. We've already helped 12 families recover from similar operations. Sandra and I are rebuilding our marriage on a foundation of complete transparency about the responsibilities that come with generational wealth. She now understands that protecting family legacy isn't about control, it's about stewardship.
The most important lesson: family wealth attracts predators who understand exactly how to exploit normal marital tensions. The only defense is professional protection, complete documentation, and absolute commitment to preserving what previous generations sacrificed to build. Trust must be earned even in marriage. Verification is never optional when generational legacy is at stake. Dad would be proud that his grandson and granddaughter will inherit not just his wealth, but the knowledge of how to protect it from those who would destroy it for their own gain.